It's really true. It's amazing how quickly I can forget what it is I'm purposing to do. I mean, literally within 2 seconds, another thought comes in, pushes. It's like pool balls. One comes in, knocks the other one out, and it's gone. So, Kathy, thank you for always reminding me to record. It is absolutely essential. See, let's see. Randy's here and Billiam is here. Hello, you two. And that gives us our baker's dozen plus one. So very happy about that. We're going to be starting on page 48, holding the pain. And before we do that, is there anything left over from last week? Or actually, 2 weeks ago, isn't it? Yeah, because Marion and I were off playing last week. So thank you for giving us that break and for showing up again after the break. That's always important. Anything that you've been thinking about, anything that you wanted to bring up before we dive into new material? Okay, yes, there was I think it was Ellen, somebody was saying, we spend so much time usually on the first 2 or 3 paragraphs that the last paragraph or two, we just kind of breeze by. And so if there is anything in the back end of our sessions that doesn't get enough development, please make a note of it and bring it up the next session so we can just start with that and make sure that we uncover all the rocks that we need to uncover in this particular journey. But also, normally the back end paragraphs are just fuller developments of what has already been introduced in the first paragraph. So a lot of time it's pretty safe to do that. Have y'all heard of the inverted pyramid style of writing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you're a journalist, you know that you write in inverted pyramid style, which means everything that you write is less important than the thing that was before it. So at any point that you stop reading the article, especially in a newspaper, it's really important when it's continued on another page, and most people don't continue. You know that you haven't missed anything that's more important than what you've already read, you see. So that's inverted pyramid, and Tanya knows all about that, the writer that she is. And so he's kind of doing that to a certain degree, that it is kind of inverted pyramid. So those last paragraphs usually don't contain any new material, but further develop what we've already really pounded on in the first couple of paragraphs. But if there is anything, please make sure that you bring it up and we'll get started with that. Okay, so holding the pain. We are holding the pain, and then this next section, finally free, are the last 2 sections of the first chapter. We are just about out of the first chapter in 31 weeks. Wow, we are just screaming by. The first chapter, called Moments of Awe, has all been basically about the what. What is it? What are we talking about when we talk about contemplation? What is the quality of it? What does it look like? What is it that we're really trying to experience? In the next chapter, which is growing up and waking up, now we're going to start talking about the how. How is it that we can create this contemplative state? How can we create this contemplative way of life? And so that's going to be a further development. So we're getting to the end of chapter 1. Last 2 weeks ago, we were talking about life as participation. So he was really talking about this participatory nature of the whole thing, that it is so experiential. And obviously, just idea of losing ourselves in the participation of life. So we're not here to dissect. We're not here to understand. We're here to participate. And I always love that quote from Frank Herbert in Dune, where he says, a process cannot be understood by stopping the process. You have to enter into the flow of the process, join with it in order to understand it. It's that way with life. It's that way with spirituality. It's why the spirit is always moving. If we're trying to understand spirit from a standstill, how could we ever? Why are we looking for the living among the dead? It's the same concept. We have to be among the moving, among the living. We have to be joined with, participating and flowing with the process if we're ever going to understand what it is we're doing. And so that's part of it. Now he's going to talk about holding the pain. I was hoping that Lori would be here, because she'd be one of the ones probably to most vociferously disagree with the first line of this. But let's read the whole section and then we'll come back. Holding the pain, page 48. It is spiritually wise to stay with your pain, whatever it is, until you've learned its lessons. When you can hold pain consciously and even trust it, you're in a special liminal space where you have the real likelihood of breaking through to a much deeper level of faith and consciousness. As a transformative image of holding pain, picture Mary standing at the foot of the cross. Standing would not be the normal posture of a Mediterranean woman who is supposed to wail and lament in this situation. Instead, she's patiently, at great cost, holding the pain in complete solidarity with the mystery of it all. She does not resolve the problem. She holds it and allows it to transform her. She is moved to a new level of existence. Jesus on the cross and Mary standing beneath it are the classic Christian images of transformation. Neither of them transmit their pain. All the hatred, accusations, malice, none of it is returned. They hold the suffering until it becomes resurrection. The natural human response is to try to fix the pain, to control it, or even foolishly to try to understand it. That's why Jesus praises faith more than love. Faith is the ability to stand on the threshold, to hold the contraries in the darkness, until you move to a deeper level where it is all from love and back to love. It is all from love and back to love. Okay. Any immediate thoughts or observations? Did anything jump out at you and all that?
I think for me, just the concept of being comfortable with the uncomfortable, being okay with not knowing. I thought it was pretty powerful to just go from where he kind of suggests, going from holding that pain to that place of love. And I was a little taken by the example that he gave too with the Mary, because she wasn't wailing or lamenting, and that's kind of how I initially interpreted holding the pain, and then I started to think of like holding as in like holding a baby, like nourishing it, allowing it to be there, not trying to necessarily react or I just thought that was interesting.
Kind of counterintuitive, huh, Sarah?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Shoot.
It said, hold on to the pain till you learn the lesson. Is there always a lesson in pain?
Oh, see, we're already getting into it. Already getting into it. Okay. Well, she took us right back to the first line that we were going to go back to anyway. It is spiritually wise to stay with your pain, whatever it is, until you've learned its lessons. So, question, is there always a lesson in pain?
I say yes.
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 Have you ever experienced, so you've never experienced pain that was sort of meaningless?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, William. What are you about there?
Well, I was struggling with well, this might be a little off the track here, but I was recently having a series of discussions about this idea of meaning and need to find meaning, pain, need to make sense of our pain and so on and so forth. And even when the conversation came up with a client who was talking about like, what's my purpose? Like, how do I figure out my purpose in life and so on? And we were just playing around with the idea that that is such a, like a mental screw job, right? When we have this idea that I'm supposed to discover my unique purpose and I'm supposed to allow my uniqueness to be the light on the hilltop and so on and so forth. And especially when I get into the place of what's God's purpose for me, and am I living God's purpose and so on. Um, and it just circled back to, why do we need to find meaning? Why do we need to make something? You know what I mean? Am I off in the weeds here?
Well, it certainly sounds like you're not much of a Viktor Frankl fan.
Well, I am a Viktor Frankl fan, but I am struggling with whether or not there's a trap there, right?
Mhm.
The idea that I now have to go through life and constantly finding my purpose and God's purpose for me, and how heavy a weight it is to carry that, right? And I think it connects back to this idea of meaning, right? Like, I can look back and see, connect the dots and meaningfulness and what meant what in my life. And my pain has to mean something for it to release me or something like that. And I think that's a bit of a mind job as well.
And that's a valid point. In fact, I was going to read something to you tonight. I wasn't planning on reading it this soon in our discussion. I guess I could go there, but before we do, so Patricia, has there been instances in your life that you've experienced pain that was meaningless or didn't have a lesson to teach?
I don't know.
Mhm.
Isn't part of being human, whether it's emotional or physical pain, isn't that just part of the human experience?
Mhm.
I mean, I never remember being without pain physically.
Mm.
And pain can be a great teacher, but I don't necessarily think there has to be a meaning in it.
So
I don't know. That's the reason I asked.
I'm so glad you did, because this is exactly where I wanted to go with this. One of the things that we have to think about is whether the meaning that we're finding or the lesson that we're learning is rational or not. Is it rational, or is it something that is trans-rational, to use one of Rohr's words? We remember where Rohr is coming from. Remember in Falling Upward, those of you who are with us for Falling Upward, he said that there are two great paths to spiritual awakening. I'm not sure he used the term spiritual awakening, but the two great paths are great love and great suffering. That those two experiences in our life had the intensity, had the ability to take us to these new areas of growth, because they have the ability to strip away all of the distractions, all of the egoic illusions, all of the projections. Everything gets really stark and really simple when you're in great love or in great pain, in great suffering. And that's very clarifying. That doesn't mean that you're going to be able, the way William was talking about, to extract some, rational or profoundly theological or philosophical meaning. There may not be any way to articulate what it is that you learn. But I think all of us do have the sense that people who suffer much are people who, first of all, they have a certain credibility to them, right? We have a church member who just had to have her right leg amputated. And I went to visit her last week, and of course you can just imagine yourself losing a leg or losing a limb like that, and what it would do to you psychologically, and how it can make you feel not whole anymore, and all those things that would go through your head. Well, the last time that we talked, she talked about that one thing that she's really learned through this process is how grateful she was for the people who came to visit her. And then she started thinking about those who have nobody to visit them when they are sick, when they're infirm, when they're in the hospital, whatever. And she said there are so many elderly people who don't have that kind of community. And she was thinking maybe she wanted to start some kind of, she didn't call it a ministry, but some type of group that would visit people who were shut-ins, people who were going through things. And that's a lesson learned out of the pain, even though she probably wasn't thinking of it a lesson. It was coming out more as an awakening to a certain situation, a desire maybe. But I was saying, first of all, because you've lost your leg, you're going to have a certain credibility. People will listen to you more than they would if you were whole, because you've gone through something like this. and you will be able to gather people to your cause and be able to do certain things. And it could end up being a whole new chapter of your life that you never saw coming until you had this clarifying moment that came through the pain and the tragedy and the suffering. I don't think that the meaning is necessarily going to be philosophical or rational. It may not be something you can put into words, but I think if we go successfully, quote unquote, through our suffering, that is, we don't allow it to completely disintegrate us, lose our integrity, and we are able to still be present to it, we can't help but grow through it. There are lessons to be learned. I think that's more about what Rohr is talking about, rather than being able to put some sort of rational meaning to it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of ringing more where you're going, William?
Well, as you were just talking, I was thinking of an accident I had where I hydroplaned and went off the road and flipped my car over a few times and so on. And it was like one of those things where I really I honestly felt like something had protected me that day or whatever. Like the whole car was smashed except for the cockpit, basically. Um, and I really wanted that to have an impact on my appreciation for life and and I remember being very disappointed that it kind of sort of didn't mean a damn thing, really. Except I needed to get a new car. And I don't know if there's something wrong with me in that this event didn't change my life or, you know, I do remember like, you know, going back up to the highway after I crawled out of the car, figured out where I was, went and packed up my briefcase and belongings, came up and hitchhiked home, and that was the end of that. Um, but I think I've had many of those types of moments where I wanted it to move me in some way. I wanted it to transform me in some way. And I don't know if I'm just dense, but
I had that same experience with my cancer journey, and it was just like, people would go around the room. I was in this cancer support group and they talk about all the things they've learned from cancer. And I'm just like, got nothing. I got nothing. And I think I had an attachment. It's almost like there's this attachment that we need to find meaning in life. And then it becomes a point of suffering because it's something to be attained instead of just being present. It's almost in the then, it's like it's not a here now experience. It's something that we've got to reach for and attain or something like that. And I had to surrender my attachment for meaning in life. I really have.
So
I really like that.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say, I really like that. That's a really good point. I think too, like, not ascribing meaning to some things has been a life-saving grace for me. I mean, like fears, not every stimulus has to have, not everything has to have like, sometimes it's irrelative, and it can be if we choose for it to be. And we sometimes I ascribe meaning to things, or maybe the wrong kind of meaning to things, and it just causes more trouble than so.
Of course, all of this is begging the question as to whether meaning is actually inherently in the event, in the circumstance, right? Or if we bring meaning to it. And that's something to also consider. Is there meaning in the car crash? Is there meaning in the cancer? Or did William and Danielle need to extract meaning from it in whatever way they do or they don't? Because I think that's a real, two people can experience the same thing and one finds deep, profound meaning and the other doesn't. Danielle just said that in some of her groups that she attended. We talked about that, Mr. Rogers, right? Fred Rogers, attending that that church service and listening to the preacher, and he was just tearing the preacher down. He thought he was horrible. He turns to commiserate with his companion, and she's got tears streaming down her face. Two people experiencing the same thing. One extracts meaning, the other doesn't. The sermon was what it was. Did it have any inherent meaning, or is it up to us to extract the meaning out of it? And is that meaning just subjective then? Is it not real? Well, if it's real to us, if it's reordering our life, then it's real for as long as it is. And then it's not again. And then we may remake meaning. Every time we go through a loss or a tragedy, the whole grieving process is about remaking meaning. And the way that life works, the way that we can show up to it and accept it on its terms and live with hope and gratitude in a changed landscape. That's what it's all about, to accommodate the loss and remake the meaning. That doesn't mean that it's rational, though. It doesn't mean that you'll be able to express it or draw it on a blackboard. But it means that it satisfies you to the extent that you can be content with life again. And so that kind of meaning, I think, is something that we do, maybe if we're not even conscious of it.
But Dave, I find myself thinking about, like, when I take offense to something somebody does to me, right? And the meaning I made of what that comment implied about me or whatever it is. And just thinking about how it's all meaningless, and all the meaning that anything has is what I project onto it ultimately. And how dangerous that can be in terms of like this egoic defense, right? Like you've disrespected me, right? You didn't hold the door, and it means this, right? Or wherever I can take that. And this constant need to make meaning of everything, to create this sense of continuity, if you will, in our lives.
Yeah, I don't think it works that way, though, William. Remember when this old saw that I keep coming back to, that I've been visiting upon you for years now, is that whole idea of God's will. And you actually brought it up just a couple minutes ago, William. You're talking about God's purpose. We want to know God's purpose, and what a mind job that is, right? Well, it was articulated as God's will when I was coming up in the evangelical church 30 some years ago. Everybody wanted God's will for their life, which they interpreted as God's perfect plan for your life that he had for you since the beginning of time, the best you that could ever be, the one that he designed you for, and yet he wasn't telling you what it was. So your job was to figure it all out and then execute it perfectly, or you would be less than what God intended for your life. And it's just like, you talk about a mind job. I mean, that's a no-win situation. That's putting someone in a round room and telling them to pee in a corner. I mean, what are you supposed to do with that? And so I went around and around that round room so many times trying to figure this out. And then I finally came to the conclusion that God's will can't be a what. It can't be a thing. It can't be a specific thing you do, a specific person you marry. It can't be any of those things. That God's will is a how. And I think our purpose is a how. So the how is this way of living life in connection, in unity, in awareness, and in presence. And any what you choose is equally fine. As long as you're living the right how, you're still right in the center of God's will. You're still right in the center of your human purpose. And that simplified everything for me. God doesn't care what I do. That's my choice. Choose whatever I want. Follow my bliss. It's okay. As long as I do it with the right how. It's the how that sanctifies the what, and not the other way around. And that made all the difference. And I think meaning is the same. The meaning that we find is always a how. Rohr likes to talk about the task within the task. No matter what thing you're doing, there's a task within that task that always relates to the same how, which is connection, which is unity, which is identification with the other. When we're practicing that how, then any what will do. It doesn't matter. And I think we can distill all of these questions about meaning down to that. What is the lesson that we're going to find in the suffering? Well, the lesson is going to be a greater sense of how. And that sense is that how is always connection. People tend to have more compassion. They tend to have more understanding if they've gone through great suffering. That tends to be what happens. And we tend to see people who've not had any real suffering in their lives that tend to be the least understanding and the least compassionate and still retain that hard shell of an egoic barrier between them and us. And so great suffering breaks all that down. Great love breaks all that down. But if you let yourself fall into great love, you're going to be experiencing great suffering. I mean, that's just the 1-2 punch. So I think it's along those lines that we're going with this. And Patricia, I don't know if that is getting around to answering your question. I don't know that there's a specific rational lesson in all suffering. But if we hold the suffering, and that idea needs to be developed further, if we hold the suffering long enough, in other words, if we don't force the paradox to resolve, if we allow those horns to stay in place of that paradox and stay in that place of divine tension, sacred tension in the middle, we're going to be opened up in a way that we wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah. So my 2 cents is that the lesson to be learned is anytime I have intense emotions, either in ecstasy or agony, I am not present with God. I'm in my head because the feelings are not because of the circumstances. The feelings are of my thinking. And the lesson I'm learning is what it's like not to be with God. In those moments, I am at calm and at peace and okay with being Randy. Okay. Those are moments when, again, at least, of course, there's a lot of guesswork involved with this, but when I'm okay, odds are in my favor. I'm okay with, my relationship connection with God in that moment is there. Again, I know that awfully sounds really kind of simplistic, but that's when I say, like, if you were to ask me, is there a lesson to be learned? It's like, yeah, in this moment, I can realize and stuff. I'm in more in my head than in my heart and with God. And that's the lesson, not necessarily like, I don't know, don't spit in the wind is the lesson. Okay, yeah, that's something in my head and logic and knowledgeable that, yeah, don't do that. But I hope, again, this is one of these things that's really hard for me to talk about, but again, it's more of a feeling. It's just, yeah, if I'm in great suffering, okay. And then the other part of this is, as Dave was talking about, I don't need to fix or resolve this. To let this just be what it be, if I'm going to suffer for 5 seconds or 5 years, whatever it is, it will resolve on its own. This is I don't know, maybe call it the centering effect. If to use like as a metaphor, it's like a pendulum swinging both ways of, again, these emotions right to the left. When it starts centering, that's this connection, if that makes sense. I'm not swinging as hard. My life has been a lot to the right, a lot to the left. And with a moment as it's swinging as it passes through the middle. And more right now, it's not swinging as far as it did to the extremes. I'm not as manic about it. And then therefore that duration of that calm of me being able to notice that there's a centeredness, a grounding in my life, that seems to be what all these moments of me being to the right or left has come. I don't know. I'll end it there.
Okay, another way of looking at it, right? Patricia, do you have anything to interject at this point now that we've spent all this time talking about your question?
Well, be patient while I try and articulate, because I'm not going to be very clear, probably because it's not clear in my own mind. But one thing William said is about our thinking about things. Our thoughts do create our emotions and our reality of our experience of what we're going through. Okay? That's why some people can be really wealthy and happy, very wealthy and unhappy, very poor, happy. And very poor and happy. 2 people can have the same experience, but have a totally different experience of that, So I know I'm not making any sense, so I think I'll just shut up.
Well, thanks, Patricia. Let's let Rohr develop his thought a little bit more with the second sentence, okay? He says, when you can hold pain consciously and even trust it, you are in a special liminal space where you have the real likelihood of breaking through to a much deeper level of faith and consciousness. Okay, so the first phrase that jumped out at me was, when you can hold pain consciously and even trust it. What's he talking about there? What does it mean to hold pain consciously?
Just to be in the present moment.
Absolutely. To me, to hold pain consciously means that in real time, while it's happening, whatever this event is, whatever this painful thing is, in that real time, you are aware of that pain and you are aware that it's happening to you. And you are aware that in this pain, there can be growth, it hurts like heck, but there can be, you're aware of all of that as it's happening. And so that you aren't having that knee-jerk resistance, kind of what Randy was talking about, the agony and the ecstasy sort of thing. You're not just retreating in the sheer pain of it. You're not reflexively blaming somebody. You're not doing any of those kind of things. You're just aware of what is happening at the moment. And you're aware that there is going to be another side to this at some point. And then to go from that to actually trusting that on the other side of this pain, there will be some benefit to it if you can hold it together. If you can keep from devolving into the blame game, devolving into deflection, devolving into some kind of self-soothing that in effect is resolving the paradox, right? That's what we want to do. We want to resolve the paradox. We want to make the hurting stop. Or maybe we just want to assign some arbitrary meaning to it that is this facile sort of platitude way, like William was talking about, that at least can deflect it. All those spiritual banalities that we hate that people throw at us when we're in pain, it's just like you want to slap them across the face. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to close the paradox. They're trying to resolve it. They're trying to put some meaning on it so that they don't feel so awkward in your presence, really is what it's coming down to in a lot of ways. But if we can resist that, if we can be aware of what's happening while it's happening and begin to trust that something's going to happen on the other side of it, we are in that liminal space. And that word, comes from the Latin, means the threshold, literally the threshold of a door. To be in that middle place, once again, that sacred tension between the horns of the paradox, to maintain that when all of the illusions are stripped away and you're really faced with naked truth and the real undergirdings of life, if you will. That is a place from which we can really break through to a deeper level of faith and consciousness. And it's always necessary. It's always the way it works. We're always talking about the descent before the ascent. And this is another example of that. But this idea of holding pain consciously, I had to kind of work that through for a bit to say, okay, what does that mean to me? How can I even make sense of that? And to me, it's simply to be aware in real time as it's happening that, okay, I'm undergoing suffering here. And I'm going to maintain my integrity. I'm going to live in faith, which means to act as if what I say I believe is true and continue to act that way, even in the midst of this agony, and see what transpires.
So, Dave, this is a little bit of the opposite of some of the other things that we've read, maybe from Rohr even, where we've talked about, and maybe it was Viktor Frankl too, but we've talked about being in the midst of pain. You don't really have the mindset for understanding what your lesson is while going through this pain. I mean, usually it's months later or sometimes years later and looking back saying, okay, I can kind of see what that means to me. Or maybe even the lesson that Kathleen just learned about her leg. I mean, that's very soon for her, but we've also talked about the fact that when you're in the pain, you don't necessarily ascribe the meaning right away because you're just angry or you're in pain or you're hurting or you're wondering why this is happening to you and all of those things that go along with that. So I don't know. So it's a different twist he's
No, but
taking.
actually I'm saying exactly that, Kathy. And that I'm glad you brought that up because it means I wasn't getting my point across. My point is we can be aware of something without thinking about it. We talk about that all over and over again, because the only way that we're really in a contemplative space is to be aware without thinking. This is awareness without rationality. We're not extracting any kind of articulated meaning out of the pain that we're undergoing at the moment. It's just holding on to it, holding on to ourselves through it, I think is a better way to put it for me. We're holding on to the possibility that on the other side of this, some good will come. That's where the trust comes in. But we don't know what that is. We have no idea what that is. And that is not the time to be figuring stuff out, because we have been pushed into a non-rational place, which is what great love and great suffering does. It takes us out of the egoic mind that worships at the altar of rational thought, right? I mean, that's what the egoic mind does. It wants to understand things, compartmentalize and put edges on them that we can hold and we can control. We're thrown into complete lack of control. We're thrown into a non-rational space. We're thrown into a place of complete uncertainty and lack of control. But if we can hold ourselves and realize that even through this, something good will come on the other side if I don't lose myself in the process. So I think we're saying the same thing, and I'm hoping that maybe comes a little clear, but in no way do I believe that we can or even should be trying to think our way through these episodes in life. That's the kiss of death. And it leads to those kind of platitudes, which is just another form of deflection. It's just battening down the hatches of the ego and trying to live inside that fortress. And we're cutting ourselves off from everything that really is human.
I see.
Dave,
Yeah.
you
Go ahead.
explained that really beautifully.
Mhm.
And I don't want to lower the spiritual conversation you just had, but I realized that I cause myself a lot of angst when I think things should be different than what they are.
Mhm.
So to me, that in a very temporal way, that's what you're saying.
Mhm.
See, we need you to just cut to the chase and make it simple. That's it. That's it. You know,
Mhm.
can we accept life on life's terms and live with hope and gratitude? You know, to me, those are the two hallmarks of a successful life. And if we can't do that, and everything we're talking about, all religion, all spirit, all it is designed is to get us to be able to do those two things. Like you said, Patricia, you know, let our expectations and our experience be the same thing rather than having them out here, which that's all the space we need to be miserable, is when our expectations and our experience are different, right? When they're
Mhm.
together, it's beautiful.
Mhm.
Can we
And
more
if
and more
we're-
live that way? But
And I think if we're thinking about why we're suffering while we're suffering,
Mhm.
like that is just, well, you're doubling your suffering at the very least.
I'm sorry. That was, but you know what though? I'm hearing, I love what Patricia said about the experience. I connect with that. And what I was hearing you, Dave, was, and I'm going to try to put this together, but it's like while I'm experiencing the pain, and I'm holding on to that consciously, that I'm also like the observer of that. But I think the cool thing is now I'm going to trust that. So I'm surrendering. I'm not trying to solve.
Mhm.
That's what I think I'm reading here from Rohr. I might be missing it.
no,
Because
I think you're right on, Tony.
when you can hold pain consciously and even trust it, you're in that special, and I'm not sure what that next word means, liminal space, where you have the real likelihood of breaking through to a much deeper level of faith. So you're not really, you're right, you're not thinking about, you're not like trying to solve it, because like William's saying, that's gonna drive you nuts. And that's the trust is, okay, we're gonna surrender to this, and then the growth can come from that.
Yeah. And you know, William's just clarifying again. When I say that we're aware of what we're going through, it doesn't mean we're thinking about it. We're not thinking about it. You know, we're just aware that it's going on. It is that little separation of the watcher, the idea of the watcher. Remember when we talked about that deeper self that
Mhm.
is overseeing the egoic mind and watching it in all of its operations. but realizes that it's separate from and not identical with. We think we are that egoic mind that speaks to us in our heads. When we can get that separated out and realize we're something deeper than that. The egoic mind is just a physical tool, a mental tool that we will have as long as we're breathing here, and then it goes away, you know. And it's the same thing during the suffering itself. If we can be somewhat separate from the suffering and realize we aren't the suffering is happening to us, and we have to undergo it, but there's going to be something on the other side of it, and we will, you know, exist beyond the suffering. It's just that awareness of all of that, I think, that gives us the ability to hold our ground. And then maybe at this point, his example of Mary at the foot of the cross starts to make more sense, right? He says, as a transformative image of holding pain, all right, here's the transformative image. Here's what it looks like. Picture Mary standing at the foot of the cross. Standing, and if you read the scriptures, John specifically says she's standing at the foot of the cross, all right? She's not kneeling down, she's not crouched over, she's not on a puddle on the floor. And Rohr says standing would not be the normal posture of a Mediterranean woman who is supposed to wail and lament in this situation. The ancient Semites had professional wailers. You would hire people to come to your house and wail and scream and, you know, and do the appropriate the type of lamentation for the dead. I mean, this was their culture. You have to understand this, right? And she's not doing any of that. She's standing there. Instead, she's patiently, at great cost, holding the pain in complete solidarity with the mystery of it all. She does not resolve the problem. Okay? She's not casting blame. She's not screaming at all of the people who are hurting her son. She's not yelling and screaming at God or the universe or the machine. She's in complete solidarity with the mystery of it all. She does not resolve the problem. She holds it and allows it to transform her. She is moved to a new level of existence. Now, he's saying all this stuff, you know, it's like an editorial comment. What was Mary's real experience in that moment? She wasn't thinking all that stuff. Of course she's not. She's thinking that, oh, good, I'm being moved to a new level of existence. No, she's not thinking that. As soon as she was thinking that, then she's out of the moment again, right? But she's just allowing the moment to unfold. She's allowing herself to stay in the moment. And that's what makes all the difference. The piece that I was going to read you, but I don't want to break off to do that right now. We've read it in here before, and I've read it on Sundays. It's about a chaplain who was talking about momentary glimpses, and her whole thesis was she was taking issue with Viktor Frankl, who said it's you know, it's all about meaning that is the main drive for humankind. And if we can find meaning in any suffering or any difficult circumstances, we can overcome it. And of course, he's coming out of Auschwitz and the death camps, and he was able to find meaning in that. But her point is that in the midst of the suffering, there is no meaning to be found. And now we're getting back to where I think William was at the very beginning of this all. You in the midst of it, it's non-rational. The suffering takes you to a non-rational place. You aren't going to be able to come up with an orderly, articulated meaning to all of this. And she lists a bunch of things like a mother in the ER who wails as her 16-year-old lies dead from an accidental shooting. And she goes through a lot of the scenarios that she has witnessed in the hospital as a chaplain. She said, there's no meaning there. And as a chaplain or someone trying to comfort that person, you don't try to impose the meaning. That's the greatest abuse you can do to someone who is suffering in that moment, to try to impose some meaning. Oh, God needed another angel in heaven. So, you know, he took your son, he took your daughter. People have actually said that kind of stuff. And that is so abusive and so harmful. But what does happen is after the fact, after you've gone through it, then in the rear view, in retrospect, you can see how it has changed the trajectory of your life. It still may not be an articulated meaning per se. It may not be an articulated lesson, but you can see how it has moved the needle and moved the needle of your life. I can look back at my my divorce, 35 years ago now, and that was such intense pain for me. Even as a lapsed Catholic, I still identified as a Catholic. And so to be divorced to me was like the worst thing. I never thought that I would ever, anyway, be a divorced man with a 3-year-old daughter having to be shuffled between mom and dad. It just tore everything out of the fabric of who I thought I was. The whole image of myself was ripped away. But that was pain enough for me to finally start on the journey that has culminated in this moment with you all, right? And so I see it now as a hinge moment. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know what was going on, but I breathed through it. I wanted to commit suicide, but I didn't do it. I breathed through it. And now I can see in retrospect how it's changed everything about my life, that suffering. That's, I think, the way that it works. It's not in real time. It has to be applied later, and maybe not even consciously or rationally. You just sort of understand it later in a different way. Just like the old grizzled alcoholic who says, I'm grateful for being an alcoholic, because he realizes that pain, that dysfunction, the destruction of relationships and jobs or whatever alcohol took from him was what was transformative in the final analysis. He says, Jesus on the cross and Mary standing beneath it are the classic Christian images of transformation. Neither of them transmit their pain. That is so important. There is no projection. There is no blame. As soon as you blame someone else for what's going through, then you lose all perspective and all ability to be transformed by what you're going through. All the hatred, accusations, malice, none of it is returned. What does Jesus say on the cross? We've said a million times, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing, which is the statement of all humanity at any given moment. Whenever we're acting out, we don't know what we're doing. We're still lost inside the egoic bubble. They hold the suffering until it becomes resurrection. The natural human response is to try to fix the pain, what we've been talking about, right? To control it, or even foolishly to try to understand it. So he's basically saying everything that we've been talking about here for the last few minutes. That's why Jesus praises faith more than love. Faith is the ability to stand on the threshold, to hold the contraries in the darkness until you move to a deeper level where it is all from love and back to love. And once again, I think it's so important when we read faith in any of these contexts or in the scriptures to make sure that we're not thinking of it as simple belief. We have watered down faith or stripped faith down to this one two-dimensional idea of just mental agreement or mental assent. That if I agree to who Jesus is theologically and doctrinally, as I was taught, well, then I'm saved, and my faith is holding on to that belief no matter what happens. But as I pointed out so many times, biblical faith is actually action. So belief is an idea. Faith is action, as if the beliefs that we say we hold are true, even in the absence of the evidence. And all of that action and all the experience we glean as we move through life as if these things are true turns into trust, because trust is experience. Belief is idea, faith is action, trust is experience. And the ancient words, both in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek, for that would be translated as faith or belief, contain all three of those concepts. So it's always belief, faith, trust. And ultimately, it comes down to trust. Belief and faith are just vehicles to trust. Because until we trust, we're still living in high anxiety. Until we trust, we're still living in fear. But as soon as you trust something, then you're not worried about it anymore. You're not thinking about it. You're not planning for it anymore. You're not paying for it anymore. You just trust it. And so Jesus praises faith, I would say trust, more than love. Faith is the ability, trust is the ability to stand on the threshold, to hold the contraries in the darkness, to trust that something good eventually can come of this, even though you don't see how in the world that could possibly happen, until you move to a deeper level where it is all from love and back to love. And I think that's where he's trying to go with this. But I know that some of you have really suffered, and it may not feel that way. And it may even give you a visceral reaction that, this is a crock, that suffering is not a good thing. And some of you have been abused, and you've gone through a lot of things that would point you in the other direction. But it's something to consider. And if you're all here and you're still breathing here and you're still trying to live with some sort of integrity, How much has the suffering that you've gone through played a part in all of that, that you may not be giving it credit for? It is just something to really think about and consider.
I wanted to say something, Dave, about that, and I like what you just said a lot. My personal experience with pain, there was a time where I felt I was bombarded by situation after situation that was very, very painful. And I know early on I fought it. I you know, I fought it tooth and nail. I was a victim. I wanted to accuse other people for the situation and the pain. But what I noticed over time was, as I learned from the experience, I could see that, I could always see that a way to say it, maybe light at the end of the tunnel. That was, to me, was the faith and the trust that allowed me to continue on. And the more that I came to that understanding, all these experiences of pain don't look the same way as they used to. My reaction to them are not the same as what they used to. And that's where I feel like you can come back to love at the point that you're not having to live through that pain. You can look at it, you can see it for what it is. It may seem at times that, you're at the bottom of the well looking up, but I think with experience you learn to understand that we do get through it. And as long as we're willing to know that and have faith in that, we'll be closer to that place of what Rohr was saying, that we come to a closer place of connectiveness, more with the moment, and it just doesn't have the same effect for me anyway, like it used to, and I'm very grateful for that.
That's great, Tony. I guess it's also important to point out, as Tony was talking here, what occurred to me was that, this is not automatic. You probably heard the saying that time heals all wounds. Not true. Time does not heal all wounds. It takes time to heal, but time isn't what's doing it. It's we coming back consciously to this place to keep moving through life, to hold the pain while it's happening, and to persevere through it and get to the other side with our integrity intact. That will take us to the place of healing. If in the healing we are willing to continue to connect, then we will get through it. But that's counterintuitive. When you're in the midst of pain, you want to retreat, you want to pull back. And it's natural to want to blame others, to try to find some quick meaning to it. Well, this is all your fault, whoever you happens to be. But we're trying to find some quick way to rationalize it. But if we can resist all of that and continue to move through, yes, we will get to the other side. And that takes time, but it takes actual conscious, intentional action as well on our part. It won't happen by osmosis. And you can look at what's the alternative to this. Well, the alternative is to remain a cosmic victim, and in that victimhood, perpetually. And we see people who are in that state as well. And that's what we're obviously trying to avoid. We want to get through with our choice intact and our ability to choose connection in the moment. And as long as we do that, we're going to get through, even if we don't really think that's possible.
That made me think about what is my purpose in life. And the simplest answer that I've been able to come with for myself is that my purpose in life is to serve. And that can take many faces, but for me, I came to asking that question to make meaning, I guess, of things.
Mm-hmm. And for me, service is not quite at the bottom of the dog pile yet. For me, service is another aspect of connection or identification. So for me, the bottom line, my purpose is to connect, to identify with the others. And then from that flows my service, and from that flows, what we would call love. But it starts with connection. It starts with unity and oneness and all of that. But we're all going to see it in a little different way. And as long as we are continuing to probe these areas, I think we're on the path. We're on the way. And that's all that can be asked of any of us. Because at any given point, our stones will not be smooth, okay? Just expect that, We're not finished. We're not complete, which I think is a point he actually makes in the next section, if I remember correctly, that we are never going to be completely whole in this life. So coming to accept that imperfection is part of the perfection. All right. Have we spun things around enough for you tonight? Good. This is a good one. And we're already over time. I was going to say, are there any last burning desires? But we don't have time for them. So if you do have a last burning desire, write it down in the margins of your book, highlight it, and then we'll bring it up next week, and we'll start with that, with part of that old business stuff that we got. Okay, Scotty.
Thank you, Lord, for this evening, sharing with each other, and that includes you. We're grateful, Father, for the time we get to spend together and the things we learned. May enrich our journey. And we're just grateful for everything you've done for us and you continue to do for us. And we thank you for your love and all that you're about. And we can't wait to discover more about what you have planned for us, and what to do with what we've already been given. Thank you for this journey, Lord. We love you. It's in your precious and holy name of Jesus we pray, we give our thanks, and we say amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, everybody. We will see you on Sunday. Good night. Good night.
Bye, guys.
Good night, everybody. See you. Bye.
Bye, Kathy.
Good night. Good night, Jordana. Good night. See you Sunday, dear.
All right. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.